Welcome you here this morning, and we'll call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 7 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. The committee is meeting in public and is being televised today. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3G, the committee is meeting today to study Report 3, Supplying the Canadian Armed Forces, National Defence, of the 2020 Spring Reports of the Auditor General of Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of September 23, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will also show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules as follows. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those participating via Zoom, before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you are done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize any interference. Should members need to request the floor outside of the time it has been given to them by me, you should activate your mic and state that you have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, they should use the raised hand function. This will signal to the chair your interest to speak, and we will create a speakers list. In order to do so, you should click on participants at the bottom of the screen. When the list pops up, you will see next to your name that you can click Raise Hand. This function creates a list of speakers for us. Unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with a boom microphone provided by the House of Commons is mandatory for everyone participating remotely who needs to speak. And of course, should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Joining us today.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm going to take advantage of your invitation to raise issues of technical matters with you. I noticed that Mr. Green and myself had difficulty logging on today due to the password link, not the password link, but the actual Zoom link. I know I've requested this before, but I'm going to ask Madam Chair if there's a possibility that when notice of meetings are sent out with the Zoom link, that it's immediately followed by the link with the passcode, so that we can easily find that in our emails, because it just makes it a lot easier for us to be able to put that information together in our own schedule so that we could arrive at the meeting on time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. I do appreciate that intervention. I understand that the notice of meeting is probably more than likely circulated to more than the members who are attending, and so
Perhaps we can resolve that by having 2 notices of meetings that go out, one for members, one for the rest.
Okay. The clerk has just advised me that they do plan on changing how the information is sent out, and it will be as you have indicated, Mr. Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All right. I will now welcome our witnesses. Joining us today from the Office of the Auditor General are the Auditor General, Ms. Karen Hogan, and Mr. Nicholas Swales, Principal. From the Department of National Defence, I would like to welcome Jody Thomas, Deputy Minister, Troy Crosby, Assistant Deputy Minister, Material Group, Jen T.J. Cadeau, Director of Staff, Strategic Joint Staff. For those of you who are speaking, you will have 5 minutes to make your opening statements. So we'll begin with you, Ms. Hogan. You have the floor.
Madame la Présidente, je vous remercie.
Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our audit report on supplying the Canadian Armed Forces. Joining me is Mr. Nicholas Swales, who was the principal responsible for the audit. The Canadian Armed Forces consist of 68,000 regular force members and 30,000 reserve force members who may be called on at any time to participate in military operations at home and abroad. To do so, the Canadian Armed Forces must be well equipped and trained, and they must be supported by a supply chain that provides members with the material they need when they need it. Our audit examined whether National Defence delivered material items requested by Canadian Armed Forces members in a timely manner while avoiding needless transportation costs. We found that military units received material such as spare parts, uniforms, and rations late 50% of the time. High-priority items required to satisfy critical operational requirements were late even more often, at 60% of the time. These delays affected National Defence's capacity to perform its duties and manage its resources efficiently.
Often caused by poor stock management. Minimum stock levels were often not set, and when they were set, stocks were below that level half the time. The warehouses expected to supply military units often did not have the material requested in stock. 1/3 of the time, supplies had to be found elsewhere and rerouted through the supply chain. These situations created bottlenecks and increased delivery times. National Defence did not adequately forecast its needs for materiel to be able to position it close to where it would be needed. Nor did National Defence have performance indicators to measure whether materiel was stocked in the right warehouses. We also found problems in prioritizing requests for military supplies. National Defence could not demonstrate that 65% of its high priority requests were actually high priority. Unjustified priority requests puts an excessive burden on the supply chain and incurs extra costs. Moreover, we found that National Defence lacked the costing information necessary to make well-informed choices about transporting materiel within Canada. The costs of commercial shipments were available, but the costs of using military transport were not. We made 3 recommendations. National Defence has agreed with all of them and has shared its action plan with us. The plan includes actions and timelines for our recommendations. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now move to our next witness. That is our Deputy Minister, Jody Thomas.
Madam Chair, thank you. Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to discuss the findings of the Auditor General's report, Supplying the Canadian Armed Forces. I would like to thank the Auditor General for looking into the issue and for her 3 recommendations. As she noted, National Defence agrees with them all. Supplying our troops is a defense team effort. Today, as already noted by the Chair, I am joined by Major General Trevor Cadieux, Director of Staff for the Strategic Joint Staff, and Mr. Troy Crosby, Assistant Deputy Minister Materiel for the Department of National Defence. A fundamental part of our defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engaged, is ensuring our people in uniform have the right equipment to do the challenging work our country asks of them. A strong supply chain is critical to that. And as COVID-19 has reinforced for all of us, a robust, effective supply chain is a strategic enabler for the Government of Canada and in a national crisis is therefore a lifeline, and the lack of one is a strategic risk. More than that, a strong supply chain needs continuous oversight and evaluation, as does any critical capability across all military environments of land, sea, air, and cyber. That is why, in 2019, the Chief of the Defense Staff and I gave joint direction to establish a Strategic Supply Chain Governance Committee within National Defense. It is overseen by Mr. Crosby and Major General Cadieux, ensuring a collaborative and fully engaged approach. The committee also ensures that National Defense has oversight and accountability for the overarching direction of supply chain management. It is important to understand that the updates I'm giving today fit firmly within a much larger strategic approach to supply chain management currently underway within the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. As the committee is well aware, supply chain challenges have been a matter that National Defense has been wrestling with for many years, but there's been progress. In fact, since we tabled our Inventory Management Action Plan in 2016, the Auditor General has positively highlighted our progress in implementing the progress on time every year as part of the public accounts audit. We have a lot more work to do. Meaningful change takes time, particularly when addressing deficiencies that have built up over decades. And while the challenges identified are real, you can be confident that we always ensure that our Canadian Armed Forces members in active operations have what they need to do their jobs. To the report itself, we agree National Defense must have the right material in place at the right time and appropriate metrics in place to monitor whether stock levels are sufficient. We began 2 comprehensive reviews this summer to help address our material planning and forecasting challenges. One review will look at improving our inventory availability benchmarks. Doing so will give us a better indication of the health of our supply chain operating environment. The second review is a more sizable project. At a high level, the end goal is to create standardized processes and leverage advanced tools in support of material planning and forecasting across the material group. Both reviews will be completed by June 2022 and will include an implementation plan. We are also in the process of ensuring that high priority requests are only made when necessary and that these classifications are justified. First, we are reinforcing policy guidelines on how to properly classify requests with responsible personnel at our wings, bases, and commands. Changing behavior is as difficult as changing systems, and this is an area of specific focus. At the same time, we've begun a thorough assessment of how to reimagine the freight distribution system to improve efficiency and optimize costs. In February 2020, National Defense awarded a contract to PricewaterhouseCoopers Canada to identify potential options to modernize our supply chain network design. I note that a review of this scale has not been undertaken since early 2000. We are currently evaluating their initial recommendations. As we gain an understanding of how we can improve our systems, we will revise and clearly communicate guidance on costs and selecting shipping methods to our personnel. Our goal is that improvements to the distribution system will be complete by April 2024, paying particular attention to performance measurement and oversight. This entire effort will be a multi-year process, but we are committed to getting it right so that our system is efficient and ready to support the Canadian Armed Forces. And we are very open and willing to report back to this committee on our progress. Thank you, and we would be very pleased to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. We will now go to Major General Cadieux.
Madam Chair, I do not have any opening remarks. Deputy Minister Thomas is representing both the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for that. Then we will move directly to our rounds of questioning. Our first round is 6 minutes, and I would like to welcome Mr. James Bazan to the committee today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is indeed a pleasure to be able to join in everyone. I want to first of all thank the Auditor General and her office for this report. The great work that your office continues to do is definitely improving the functions of our military, but government across all spectrums as well. So thank you so much. And I want to thank our officials from Department of National Defense for being here and for addressing the concerns that have been raised by the Auditor General. So I'm going to start off my first bit of questions, Madam Chair, to the Auditor General. I'm just, you in your report say that overall supply chain management by National Defense is poor. If you were to grade it as a school teacher, would that be a D, a D minus, an F? I'm just trying to get a handle about how poor you considered the supply chain management at this point in time.
There's a reason I became an auditor, so I didn't have to grade individuals. I mean, it's hard to say. I think if you look at some of the areas that we identified some weaknesses, we saw late deliveries, poor stock management, inefficient processing. But we also, saw in one of the case studies that we put in the chapter in Exhibit 3.3 that the department finds ways to find solutions. What we noted is that it's a very inefficient way of running a supply chain, and so it depends what you want to grade, I guess. So it's an ineffective use of the supply network, but they find solutions. Right. It's a hard grade to give.
Okay, I appreciate that, Ms. Hogan. Now, you said that there's been a lot of high priority requests that weren't actually high priority. Can you give us an example of what that might entail? That somebody said, okay, I need this right away, but actually wasn't required to be there right away?
So the definition of high priority is one that was set by the department. I think it depends on the circumstances of the situation. Obviously, I might ask Mr. Swales with me if he has some specifics. We simply looked at whether or not the high priorities arrived on time, and what we saw is that in 60% of the cases they were late. I don't, Nick, if you wanted to add to that.
I guess I can add a little bit. So we were asking for the information that justified the high priority cases, and we would find instances where there was no explanation, or also instances where, on reviewing the information that was provided to us, the units themselves said, yes, we don't understand why that was a high priority item. Because the circumstances in which it was being asked for, on review, didn't seem to justify that. So those were some of the kinds of scenarios that we were observing.
So in the report in paragraph 3.23, you guys talk about why late delivery can impede the military's ability, and you specifically say conduct training operations as scheduled, be efficient in its missions and operations, act quickly to respond to emerging threats. I know that Ms. Thomas said in her opening comments that we can ensure that our CAF members in active operations have what they need to do their jobs. So I just want to make sure that we square the circle here, that were you able to confirm that those that are currently deployed on operations like Op Impact in Kuwait and Iraq, in Lebanon and Palestine, or those that are on NATO Operation Reassurance and stationed in Latvia, or Operation Unifier in Ukraine, that there was no delays in getting materiel into the hands of our forces that are currently deployed?
Perhaps Ms. Thomas will want to add to this, but what our audit did look at was the actual mechanics of the supply chain from request to delivery, not on the impacts it might have had operationally. So I do believe that question is best answered by someone at National Defense or in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Okay, Ms. Thomas, Major General Cadeau.
Madam Chair, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to respond. Our belief is that, of course, it is critical that equipment get to those who are deployed at all times to ensure that they are never at risk during the deployment. And that's everything from spare parts to food to uniform to their mail. And so it is an essential part of overseas operations. General Cadeau can speak to operations, but we believe that we ensure that operations do receive the equipment they require. There are complexities in the system and mistakes are made. There is absolutely no doubt, but it is a complex operation. So if you take a ship at sea, op reassurance as an example, the ship needs something and you're often sending it to the next port they're going to be into, or it is going out by helicopter, or so the difficulty and the complexity of ensuring that something gets to an operation is not as simple as sending a mail.
I appreciate that, Ms. Thomas, because it definitely for deployed troops, especially when we have our frigates in operations, it is very challenging, and I get that. And so I'm just wondering, and I guess this is both for you and for the Auditor General's office, is when you look at the management of that supply chain, you got a combination of procurement being done by national defense as well as being done by military personnel. So, is there kind of a breakdown in communications on getting those supplies?
I'm sorry, Mr. Bazan, your time is more than up. Perhaps we can come back to that question.
Okay, I'll address that in my next round.
Great, thank you. We will move on to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes.
Thank you all for coming. I look forward to hearing your answers today. I would like to direct my questions to Ms. Thomas and Major General Cadeau. In 2016, the Auditor General previously recommended that D&D develop supply chain performance metrics and review how stock levels for materials were established. Why hasn't that been fixed? It's now 4 years later.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. I'm going to turn to ADM Materiel, Troy Crosby, to answer that, because that's more on the material management side of things. The metrics in question are under development now. In 2017, we launched a 10-year program to repair, improve, and modernize the supply chain. And we are 3 years into that program now. Some of it has to do with developing the standards and how we will measure, and some of it has to do with modernizing the system through IT approach to things. Because we do so much that is manual and we use multiple systems right now. And so it is, there's no one input that says, let's develop KPIs. And it is then a problem solved. In fact, there's multiple layers to this situation and to what needs to get done in order to ensure that not only are we providing the performance metrics, we actually have reasonable standards, we have reasonable processes, and we have a IT system to manage it. So, Troy, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. What I'll add is that at this point, our focus has been on stock out rates, the occasions where there is zero stock available to respond to a demand. But over time, as we bring in new technology and we have access to the information and we can really measure our performance, we're going to turn our minds more to performance metrics focused on reliability, on responsiveness of the supply chain, on optimizing where our inventory is actually located, and on the accuracy of our stock taking counts. All of those together will allow us to improve our performance in responding to the demands of the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
I can see in the action plan that there is a expected completion date of December 31st, 2028. It seems like a long time to be integrating your capital software project, given that the technology, as you said, needs to be improved now.
So again, I'll go back to my colleagues and ask them to expand on this because they are leading the effort. We're talking about 500,000 orders per year, 460 million items. So there is the complexity to the amount of material that we're talking about. There's complexity to the number of locations where it is managed from. And there's complexity to ensuring that we have one system that is from ordering to delivery and performance metrics rather than the multiplicity of systems we use now. What we have decided is that we are going to understand the problem before we rush in and try and fix it. There have been attempts in the past, and those attempts have only looked at one or two aspects of the complexity and the range and depth of the problem. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And so we have committed to timelines and firm milestones and when things are going to get done, and we're happy to report back on those. Troy, would you like to add anything else?
Thank you again. What I'll add there is some of the steps between now and 2028 that was mentioned, and that culminates with the delivery of an enterprise-wide resource management information system that will allow us to make all that information come together and to be able to measure the performance effectively. Between now and then, we'll grow across a number of fronts, as Deputy Minister had mentioned. For example, an automatic information technology program is coming into fruition. It's been approved in the summer of 2019.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I just have a limited amount of time, and I want to get to my next question, which is touching on what Mr. Bazan was saying on a more international level, taking it down to the more local level about ensuring that the military has a sufficient stock and to perform their operations and missions. Given the delivery challenges, how has COVID, the pandemic, impacted the supply chain?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. COVID has impacted many aspects of the work in Department of National Defense, just as it has with every other aspect of business and life in Canada. Some of the work on this project has been slowed. However, while we sent employees home to be at home and try to stop the spread, we have kept people in warehouses and supply depots working.
Sorry, I just want to ask, this past summer, the CAF, through Operation Laser, they were helping many vulnerable communities like the long-term care homes. Were they adequately, did they have enough supplies? Did they receive their supplies on time?
They did. I'll ask Major General Cadieux to respond, as he was critical and leading that Op Laser operation.
A very short response, as Ms. Yip's time has run out.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Ultimately, this is about better supporting men and women deployed on operations. Specific to Operation Laser, both our Chief of Defence Staff and Deputy Minister issued clear direction that before any CAF personnel integrated into operations to support Canadians, our most vulnerable Canadians in their time of need, that they'd have the personal protective equipment that they'd require for those operations. And that happened for those personnel integrating into long-term care facilities.
Thank you very much. I will now go to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to say hello to my colleagues, as well as the witnesses here today. Ms. Hogan, it's very nice to see you again. Thank you for being with us today. This is a very important topic. I took the time to look at the documentation, and here's my question, and it's for you, Ms. Hogan. The least we can say is that your report went into great detail, and it certainly shed some light on situations that all Canadians would never have been able to see, and I would like to thank you for that. The different responses by National Defence to your recommendations, well, I would like to know what this does to your level of confidence. Do you think that the follow-up measures that are being applied, are you satisfied with those? As the officials from DND have already mentioned, we have received an action plan as a follow-up to these recommendations. We also got a follow-up plan for the action plan that was presented in other areas by public accounts. So measures have been taken to address the recommendations. We can't say anything about their progress thus far, but we do know that the department is doing a lot of work on the action plan and reflect the recommendations made by public accounts. Every year we do a follow-up. So far, we are satisfied with the progress made, but it is a long-term long-term action plan. So there are an awful lot of years ahead of us to do the follow-up. Thank you very much for that answer. I know that it takes a long time to plan a supply chain. And if you look at the dates that have been set forth, I know you're talking about 2024, 2028, and there's an action plan that was prepared in 2016. Do you think that those objectives are realistic, or do you think that we have to be even more diligent to meet the goals in the coming years? Well, it's difficult to make a comment on the time that is required to implement all of the improvements that are required at DND. It's difficult to say whether everything is realistic or not, but we want to see some progress. For a number of years, when we did have recommendations, that is, the Public Accounts Committee made recommendations, there was a follow-up, and in 2016, there was a very detailed follow-up plan that was prepared. It's very difficult to assess the progress on a yearly basis. Well, certainly I agree with you that we have to have some results, and it's sometimes difficult to really find the details of the progress. But I was wondering whether Ms. Thomas or her colleagues can comment on this action plan. Do you think that there has to be a more detailed oversight? I know that this isn't a retail operation. These are military operations. Do you think the action plan for 2024 or 2028 is such that we should actually hope that the things would be accomplished before those dates? Thank you for the question.
Always pushing for things to be done more quickly. It is frustrating in this department how long activities and responses, remedies, solutions to issues raised by the Auditor General or our own internal audit or our own internal process review, how long it can take. In this particular case, because of the complexity of the system and the moving from essentially multiple analog, handwritten systems and very, very simplistic databases to one end-to-end solution, including the transportation aspects of it, I think this is reasonable. What we do commit to is reporting back to this committee on our progress. And of course, we communicate regularly with the Auditor General on our progress. Our goal is to do it more quickly. What we'd like to do is ensure we do it correctly.
Merci des précisions.
Thank you for that clarification. In your opening remarks, you said there were problems related to COVID-19. We know that this report stems back from 2017, and there was no COVID-19. So how do you explain the problems that have been raised by the OAG? Is it a lack of internal communication that may have had an effect on the supply chain, or could it have been other problems?
For the question. I'll invite my two colleagues to comment. There's a range of problems, old systems, processes that we have not updated, no performance measurement, and old processes in stockrooms and storerooms where we're not always sure what's in the facility. I think the complexity of ensuring that every location around the country can equip and repair and supply sort of every piece of equipment is difficult, and we've tried to do that. I think now what we have to do is look at automating the system, having databases where we can find out where things are and how quickly we can move them around the country, and ensuring that we have centers of excellence that supply certain parts of the armed forces are the way to go in the future.
Very much, Ms. Thomas. We will now need to move on to Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to begin by thanking my colleagues on this committee who reached out with passwords and with links to this meeting. As you know, I had technical difficulties, but our world-class IT staff got me back on pace. Look, I'm going to dive right in here, and I'm going to ask the question that's on the minds of perhaps the media watching, friends and family who are watching, certainly my community. This government has touted the vaccine distribution program being delivered by the military. And yet what we're hearing in this startling audit report is that all processes are in storerooms and stock rooms. Action plans are leading into 2024, 2028. I'm going to ask the very direct question through you, Madam Chair, to the Department of National Defense. What conversations have they had on military preparedness to respond to the hundreds of millions, the tens of millions of critical vaccines that are supposed to be distributed across the country to the provinces, to the long-term care facilities, to the hospitals, to the pharmacies in order to combat COVID, which we are experiencing right now as the single most severe national threat to Canada?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to begin that answer, and then I'll turn to General Cadieux because he is a member of the ADM working group that is looking at vaccine distribution. The Canadian Armed Forces will potentially be part of that solution. There are multiple vaccines being looked at, I think, as everybody is aware, and each requires a different solution for distribution. What is critical to understand is that that vaccine would not come into the Canadian Armed Forces system. What we would use is the barcoding technology or whatever distribution technology the owner of the vaccine uses, and we would be a conduit for moving it, either from a logistics planning perspective, from a personnel perspective, actually unloading planes, or potentially our own aircraft. That's all under review now.
May I interject and ask, at what point did this review start, and how long has your department been working with the various health agencies and public services and procurement on preparing for the distribution of this vaccination?
The Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces have been working.
If I may, I just want to remind our members that while I know we are very interested in certainly what is happening today as a result of the uncertainty that we are living in, I think we need to remember that we are focusing on the report of the Auditor General. Thank you.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, the revelations that we're getting in the conversations around the lack of preparedness on logistics preparation are very much in keeping with the audit. And the fact that they're talking about follow-up plans in 2024 and 2028, if we're not laser focused on their ability to deliver socks and uniforms and nuts and bolts, then what are we looking at in terms of COVID vaccination? So I'll go back to the question respectfully. Our mandate is broad, by the way, Madam Chair. So back through you to the Department of National Defense, if you could please answer this question.
Madam Chair, I'm pleased to answer. I am very confident that the Canadian Armed Forces would be able to participate, lead, or be a part of any vaccine distribution should we be asked to do so. We've been working with Public Health Agency, PSPC, Health Canada, and other government departments since the beginning of the pandemic to assist in any way possible. Some of that you saw in the long-term care facilities. Now planning is underway for vaccine distribution. Canadian Armed Forces were very heavily involved in PPE distribution from the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm going to turn to Major Cadieux to explain to you some of the things that have been done and would be able to be done if we were asked to distribute vaccine.
And Major Cadieux, just on a caveat to that question, was the military also involved in the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile distribution, or not at all?
Madam Chair, thanks for the question. I just want to start by reinforcing that our number one priority in the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense is to get the materiel and equipment to the men and women that are conducting operations on behalf of the Government of Canada. And I can say categorically that we get that right most of the time. Consider the complexity of the challenge. We move about 500 million items of inventory and material. We procure it, we warehouse it, we move it out to the teams that require it. Often those teams are not static. And once we acquire a piece of equipment and material, we're responsible to look after it for the life cycle of that equipment. So we take that very seriously. And for CAF members that are deployed in operations, we deliver each and every time.
This is your mandate. I need to get directly to the question. In the Auditor General's report, 3 3.11, it says that they found a third of some 1 million requests were rerouted. These rerouted requests resulted in increased use of commercial transportation. I put back to you, if these are COVID vaccinations that are being rerouted, we have a problem. How do you comment on that?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. We have taken direction from our Deputy Minister and our Chief of Defence staff to start getting at some of these issues now. And the Deputy Minister referred to it in her opening remarks that we have established in this department a Defence Supply Chain Oversight Committee that comprises both the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence, providing oversight to that supply chain. Our Vice Chief of Defence staff, on the direction of our Deputy Minister and our Chief of Defence staff, has made this supply chain reform one of our priorities. We also recognize that getting at this needs more than just addressing symptoms. We have to address long-term root causes. And so we're very focused on people, processes, and systems. We could speak to some of those things.
So
thank you. No, thank you very much.
As a point of order, Madam Chair, I just have a point of order for you to clarify. When you intervene on my time, does the time stop? Because quite frankly, you know, your editorial on my intervention took away from my time. And I'm saying that with the utmost respect, madam.
One moment, Mr. Green. All right, we did not stop the clock, but I'm happy to give you another 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I'm a new Democrat. I fight for every second. So through you to the National Defence, given the nature of these reports, were you surprised by the information found by the Auditor General, or were you aware of how badly the supply chain management system was operating?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. We were aware there were problems in the supply chain, and that's why a 10-year project was begun 2 years ago in order to rectify the problems and to look at automating the system. So we have a new project, AIT, which is a barcoding project in definition. We have been looking at the delivery routes. We've been looking at KPIs, and that's why the Oversight Committee was put in place before the Auditor General's report came out. The Auditor General's report confirmed what we knew and what we were already beginning to work on.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. I will now move to our second round of questioning. The first speaker is Mr. Bazan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to continue on with that line of questioning on the vaccine distribution. And essentially, I think that if you look at the Auditor General's report, Madam Chair, it talks about the problems being around material management, not necessarily logistics. And so as I told Major General Cadeau when he made this announcement at the National Defense Committee on Monday, I have full confidence in our armed forces and Department of National Defense of getting this right in the COVID distribution. So I just want to make sure that based upon the findings that we just had from the Auditor General, although it was from the spring report, she says in paragraph 3.30 that the delays have affected capacity to perform duties of the Canadian Armed Forces, and we know that there's a number of requests, 162,000 requests that were late over a year. Do any of those delays in requests for material affect the logistical ability of the Canadian Armed Forces to manage the logistical delivery of vaccines across this country?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I would say unequivocally no. There is no impact on the ability to deliver vaccines should the Canadian Armed Forces be asked to do so.
So when we are looking at the delivery of vaccines, and I know that this is still all much discussion level right now, the planning is in place. We're talking that we're still, 60, 90 days out from receiving those first vaccines. So are there going to be specific resources that are going to be dedicated to this effort from the Canadian Armed Forces, such as outlined in the Auditor General's report, to ensure that these deliveries happen on time?
Thank you very much for the question. There are a number of oversight committees and working groups, and it's busy, heavy lifting work to look at this from Deputy Minister, Chief of Defence Staff level through the system. Major General Cadeau sits on one of those committees, and he is very actively involved with PACP on the logistical planning. So I'll ask him to give you some of the detail of what's being examined.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. The Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces, we are currently supporting Public Health Agency with a detailed logistical planning effort to help better understand what the requirements are going to be for the eventual rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. That work it's still ongoing. The role that the Canadian Armed Forces is going to play or could potentially play in the actual rollout is yet to be confirmed. What is almost a certainty is that no one entity in this nation is going to be able to take on this challenge independently. Again, the various options are being considered right now, but the ultimate solution will likely be a combination between public and private collaboration in terms of getting this vaccine to where it needs to go in support of Canadians.
Madam Chair, through you to Major General Cadeau, is this a named operation yet by National Defence?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Since the start of the pandemic, the Canadian Armed Forces in the Department of National Defence, we've been trying to do our part alongside whole of government partners. That includes through integration with the Public Health Agency. At the start of the pandemic, under the rubric of Operation Laser.
Okay, so that's be part of Operation Laser then?
Madam Chair, at this time, we do not yet know the extent or the role that the Canadian Armed Forces could play in the actual rollout of the COVID vaccine. The logistical planning support and liaison that's currently being provided to the Public Health Agency is under our existing operations.
Madam Chair, one of the things that have been reported on as a major restraint on being able to disperse these vaccines when they start arriving is freezer space and freezer capacity and having those located in the right place. And like the Pfizer product, they're talking needs to be stored at negative 75 degrees centigrade. So will National Defence be expected using the Defence Procurement Act to acquire that type of freezer capacity to help with logistical distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. We haven't gotten into that kind of a request or discussion that I am aware of. We do have a RFP or request out now on Canada Buy and Sell to look at some storage capability, but that's for internal Canadian Armed Forces use when we get to the point of vaccinating our own troops. In terms of national requirements, we've not been asked to participate or take any action that I am aware of, unless it's happening at the working group, and I'll ask General Cadieux.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. We will now move to Mr. Sorbera for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome everyone today. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to the Canadian Armed Forces during the COVID-19 pandemic. A number of them were at the Woodbridge Vista long-term care facility in my riding, and performed duties that were exemplary. And I just wish to say a big thank you, merci beaucoup. I do wish to note, when I read the Auditor General audit, and I went through the details and the audit objective of what that was. So I'd like to turn my attention to what the audit objective was, and in that terms of in this being an independent assurance report, if I can use those terms, and go back to what this committee is focused on. I do wish to ask the Deputy Minister, in your opening comments, you do have a reference here, February 2020, National Defence awarded a contract to PricewaterhouseCoopers to identify potential options to modernize their supply chain network design. I note that a review of the scale has not been undertaken since early 2000, which I found very surprising. Most organizations, their supply chains are critical, if not the most critical component of the organization's success or failure, be it from a retail grocer to the national to national defense. Can you elaborate in terms of the contract, in terms of maybe the terms of reference of that? I'm surprised I'm not hearing, and I know something to the extent what supply chain technologies utilized now in national defense, if it's SAS or SAP or whatever technological. So can we speak to that, please? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't know the name of what particular technology we use, the particular system. I agree that a review of our supply chain system is well overdue, and leaving it for 20 years is far too long. Technology has changed multiple times in that time frame. And so this is well overdue, and we will have to have an evergreen process to review it going forward. I'm going to ask Mr. Crosby to give you the details of the contract, and if he doesn't have them, we will get them to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy. To answer the question about the system that we rely on, it's based on an SAP program and we call our system the Defense Resource Management Information System. That is going to be modernized, moving towards an S/4HANA solution, which drives really ultimately the timelines that we were speaking about earlier in response to some of the questions. The review that's going on right now with PricewaterhouseCoopers is really looking at optimizing the transportation system. They've looked at about 5 million data points to model that, to find a way of optimizing the solutions. That's one part of the solution, as the Deputy Minister has said. There are other elements we've touched on: automatic information technology. We're about to sign a significant contract for bringing barcoding to many of our items on a priority basis. And then, of course, there's the work around our business processes and making sure that our people are well trained, professionalized, providing them the tools to get that work done. All of this happening in parallel and under the supervision of multiple levels of governance across the department.
Thank you for that explanation. That was excellent information pertaining to the audit and some of the material within the audit. To the Office of the Auditor General and Auditor General, great to see you again, and just wonderful to be on this committee. I've served on finance and a few other committees during the last 5 years, and public accounts I have a great deal of respect for. I do wish to have a question in terms of this review of the Canadian Armed Forces versus or relative to, because always, benchmarking is very important for me, versus other armed forces of other G7 nations. If there is any sort of comparison that is done, or we can look at, it's easy to say and look at one organization, how they're doing, but it's great to also extend that out to say, well, how are they doing relative to their peers or other comparables?
I will ask Nick to chime in a few minutes in case he does have some additional information about this. Whenever we undertake any audit, we always try to look to best practices, whether they be across our country or in other places. I'm not exactly sure to what extent that was done when it came to looking at other defense departments across the world or other companies with that manage supply chain. So I will turn to Nick to see if he can provide some additional insight on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We did not do any comparative work with other organizations at any level of detail. So we were focused on what the expectations, what reasonable expectations were for the Canadian forces themselves, and the results we got from that.
Thank you very much. I know 5 minutes goes by very quickly, and now we're going to move to our 2.5-minute round, which is going to go even quicker for our members. Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm asking you a lot of questions, and I find it extremely interesting what questions my colleagues have asked and the answers as well. And Ms. Thomas talked about the automation and the updating of the systems. And I've been looking at the exhaustive report by Ms. Hogan, and there's something that I don't find in it, and that is the source of the problem. There are a lot of observations and recommendations and an action plan, and there's obviously a lot of willingness on the part of D&D. But I would like to know what led to all of these supply problems. I was wondering whether you could shed some light on that. I'm trying to understand why, despite all of the recommendations, the action plans, the oversight, the transparency at D&D, who presented all sorts of reports, I was wondering how we ended up in the current situation. in order to give you a proper answer about the cause, I think the department would be in a better position to answer. It's important to recognize that a supply chain is very complex. It is even more so when you include the logistics that are required to ship equipment across the country or ship it by boat to other countries. The department does have an action plan and they're making progress on it. As for the causes, I think that it is the department who would be in a better position to answer that. I was wondering whether the department would be able to give us an answer, because it seems to me that we're not going to the source of the problem. We're not going to the root of the problem. There are action plans, there's a lot of willingness and action plans, but the problem persists. Well, I look at the figures and I nearly fell off my chair. We're talking about the national defense staff here who have to intervene in emergency situations. There are all sorts of delays, even priority items that are required for operational requirements. More than 60% of the time they arrived late. So I was wondering what your answer to that would be.
To respond, and then I'm going to turn to my colleagues. I think that the answer is both complex and simple. It is a massive system. We move 26,000 types of items across 19 missions in 25 countries. And there have been boutique solutions for particular problems across the armed forces, but we've never had an end-to-end solution. And why? Well, we've had manual systems. We've had very early database systems, but they've been individual things. They've been boutique. They've been siloed. And as a result, mistakes get made, items get lost. And there have been some attempts to rectify that over the years, but the urgent overtakes the sort of fundamental institutional aspects of this department on occasion. We now have a end-to-end, all parts of the department, Canadian Armed Forces, defense team, joined up approach. It's certainly been helped by the Auditor General's observations and spurred us on to more activity, but we realized that this had to be done before the audit.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas, and I'm sorry we don't have time to refer to the other witnesses. I need to move to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we're synchronizing our timers now. On March 13th, 2020, the Chief of Defense Staff activated Phase 3 of the pandemic response under Operation Laser. Yet this morning, we've heard in testimony that the National Defense folks don't know the extent of the scope that National Defense will play in the COVID vaccine distribution. The Liberals are already suggesting that distribution will happen in Q1 of 2021. What is your timeline to be ready for distribution?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question, and I'll ask General Cadieux to jump in. We will be ready when we're asked to be ready. There are multiple kinds of vaccine out there. Whatever the Canadian Armed Forces is asked to do, we will ensure is logistically and operationally possible. I don't actually think there is a correlation between this audit and our ability to distribute the vaccine, if I can be completely honest.
Well, if I could respond to that, Ms. Thomas, if the fact that, you know, you have 50% failure rate on prioritizing materials, all of the things that are identified in this audit as being problematic to your ability to distribute basic military things, in my opinion, given the pandemic we're in, has a direct correlation to your readiness. So I'm happy to hear from your colleagues, but it's concerning to me that the Liberal government is committing the military to be part of distribution systems, but the military doesn't seem to know the role that it's played. It creates confusion and undercuts the confidence.
I think the military will know the role it's played when it's asked to play a role, and we haven't yet been asked to play a role in vaccine distribution. It's just like the long-term care facilities. That was a brand new operation for the Canadian Armed Forces. They went in, they did a recce, they trained people, and they executed perfectly. I have absolutely zero doubt that this would be any different.
Within Q1 of 2021, your military will be prepared to distribute whatever COVID vaccines would be made available?
As General Cadieux said, it would be a combination of public and private distribution. It will not come into our supply chain. We would be a transport vehicle. We will help organize the logistics of bringing the vaccine into Canada through the lead at the Public Health Agency of Canada, and we would do anything else that is asked of us. General Cadu, do you have anything to add?
Madam Chair, we are currently supporting thousands of Canadian Armed Forces men and women deployed on 20 operations around the globe, and we do that very successfully. Anytime we can improve our supply chains to better look after our men and women.
But just to be clear, you haven't been asked to date. You haven't been asked to date. I appreciate your mandate, Mr. Cadu, but you haven't been asked to date on the supply of COVID vaccinations.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Public Health Agency is currently leading the COVID-19 vaccine task force and the planning effort behind that. The Canadian Armed Forces is contributing to the logistical planning for that effort. It's a very complex problem. That estimate is ongoing. Will take some additional time before we can determine what the potential role for the Canadian Armed Forces might be.
Thank you very much, General Keto. We will now move to our 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Lawrence.
Perfect. I just want to start off by saying that one of the great honors of being the representative from Northumberland, Peterborough South, is that I get to, in some cases, sit shoulder to shoulder. In this case, Zoom camera to Zoom camera, with some very esteemed individuals. And I'd like to start, like I said, by thanking all of you for your service. And I absolutely believe that we have the best, most well-trained, well-prepared, hardest working, most dedicated service people in the entire world here in Canada. So thank you first and foremost for all of your service. Secondly, I'd like to move on knowing that we have such great service people, and I also would like to say, particularly you, Ms. Thomas, your openness, your willingness to share with the committee is greatly appreciated. What roadblocks do you face? What's stopping us from ramping things up between, as has been pointed out by a number of folks, getting from 2028? How could we move that to 2024? Is there financial support to be direct? Are there roadblocks? Is there legislation? If we could get unanimous consent in the House to say, hey, let's do what Ms. Thomas says, we need to get this fixed immediately. What advice would you give to us?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. I'm going to ask Troy Crosby to weigh in on this question. I think at this point, I want everything done more quickly so that we can provide the armed forces with what they need and so that the department can fulfill its mandate to support the Canadian Armed Forces. What I'm very concerned about is making sure that we do it correctly. Which doesn't mean that we should not be looking at ways to ensure that we can maybe advance milestones and do better than the milestones we've laid out. At this point in time, the complexity of the project ahead means that we need to understand it before I commit to anything. Mr. Crosby, would like to add anything?
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I have to completely agree with the Deputy. The thing that we mostly need right now is to focus on a very disciplined execution of the plan that we put in front of ourselves. We're absolutely seized with getting this done. Everyone is focused on supporting the Canadian Armed Forces, particularly when they're in operations, but in training as well. We're all completely seized with that objective. And what we need is to be able to deliver methodically over time and build on our successes, test ourselves, check our assumptions, make sure that we're moving forward so that we deliver a long-term workable solution, and we can measure our progress along the way. We'll focus on the high priority areas again, such as deployed operations, and over time we'll deliver a very fulsome solution.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Once again, I appreciate those answers. I guess the one bit of advice I would share with you is please feel free to ask for more. We want to make sure that you are taken care of. On that same vein, and I do have to say that I think my colleague Mr. Green's questions, a lot of them passionately delivered and certainly coming from the right place, that we want to get Canadians the vaccine. On the same thing as to what resources we can get you, and I realize that if the plan comes tomorrow, if it comes 60 days or comes from 90 days, the military will be there and be ready. But what else could we do? What else could this government do? What else could parliamentary, and to make sure that you're in the best possible position to help deliver that vaccine?
Thank you very much for that question. we need to work with the Public Health Agency and our colleagues around town to look at what the delivery mechanisms required for each of the various vaccines will be. So that's working with the health experts, it's working with the contracting experts in PSPC, and it's working with our colleagues in the Canadian Armed Forces to understand the modalities of transportation, storage, distribution, accounting for it. And so there's a significant amount of work to be done, which doesn't mean that we won't be ready when that vaccine needs to be picked up somewhere. And it doesn't mean necessarily that the Canadian Armed Forces would be picking it up, but maybe we will. What we have to do is understand what the supplier of the vaccine requires for transportation and distribution, and then we'll be able to work backwards from that. General Cadieux, do you have anything to add?
Madam Chair, Deputy Minister, as has already been alluded to, the prospect of moving a COVID-19 vaccine across the country is a tremendous undertaking. It will require close collaboration, of course, at the federal level, but also with all of our provinces and territories that are going to have to mobilize support. This will be a public and private endeavor. In essence, it'll be a whole of nation support. And so we continue to backstop the Public Health Agency as they assess what's going to be required for the distribution of this vaccine.
Thank you very much, General Cadeau. Your time has expired. Mr. Lawrence, I will now move to Mr. Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses, and always great to see Ms. Hogan, third time this week. What are you doing tomorrow? But these committees really, as Mr. Lawrence said, we have the opportunity to talk to phenomenal people with great expertise, so we really appreciate this. In my previous lives, I managed warehouses for hydraulic equipment, distribution across Canada, starting in Winnipeg, and then I had a warehouse in Mississauga. Eventually, I took on a managing director role down in Welland, Ontario. We converted to SAP. That was an interesting little piece of memory for me, because SAP does have logistical software that's very powerful, but needs to be fed properly. And so my question's more along the lines of the inventory management theory that might be employed. We sent our staff down to Texas A&M, the Army and Navy University in Texas, where they learned ABC management. Top 80% of your volume comes from 20% of your line items, and you manage your stock out quantities accordingly. One piece that always entered in was, at some point you have to invest in your inventory. You have to move things from your balance sheet, from your cash into stock. Over the years, going to zero quantity on hand quite often is a culture of, we don't have the money, so we'll wait until we're out of stock before we reorder. Is this any part of the audit in terms of the culture of having enough resource to order the stock that you need to have rather than letting it get to zero? And the inventory management systems. I'll turn it over. It's maybe several layers to that question, but first of all, in terms of our audit, I see in 311 and 312 sections talking about systems in general, but did we look at what are the underlying systems that we employ that we then feed software? Ms. Hogan? Or?
So we, it's my understanding that we did not look at all the underlying systems. We did look at the supply chain from the time a request is entered until its delivery point. Okay. Over the years, through the public accounts audit, we do look at the challenges that the department has had in properly tracking the quantities and values of inventory, which are part of what you're talking about. And then it feeds into the supply chain and the logistics of moving things through the supply chain.
Right, thank you. And my assumptions may not apply here, but can maybe someone from maybe Ms. Thomas, in terms of operations, you've got procurement, warehousing, and operations drawing. Is there a resource component that needs to be addressed in terms of restocking the armed forces?
Thank you very much for the question. It would be, I would be incorrect if I said there was not a resource implication, because that will happen at the local level. Somebody will make a local decision to let something go to zero. That doesn't mean it was an incorrect decision, and I'm certainly not casting aspersions on those decisions, but if we have a national view, we have a better we have a better chance of managing and ensuring that there are no zero stock situations. I'll ask Troy to jump in as he manages the national inventory.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Two opportunities here. One, to build on the answer that was just provided there, in that in certain cases, there's deliberate choices made to leave stock levels at zero because the material can be acquired fairly rapidly at a local level and it's not worth storing. In other cases, there may be material that has shelf life, and we make decisions about just how much to stock so that we don't have material going expired. But the other element I just thought I'd build on from the question is something we haven't spoken about yet, and that is ensuring that below the barcodes that the material identification information for every one of those 500 million items is correct. Without that, we won't know whether or not things are about to expire, whether or not they have a shelf life. So that material information layer is yet another major part of our action plan to move forward and improve the system.
Great. And in terms of the distribution system review, the authority to be able to make purchasing decisions based on the requirements that are set into the system, is that an issue?
The positioning is part of our action plan, knowing where we're storing our equipment, whether we have it in the right numbers in the right places. I think the Auditor General's report has highlighted the importance of that in making sure that we're resilient and responsive in our supply. That's a business choice that will have to be made and factor into the overall choices in the way forward.
Thank you very much. We now need to move on to our third round of questioning, which is back to a 6-minute round, and we will be starting with Mr. Bazan.
Okay, had to make sure I was unmuted. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to go back again briefly onto the distribution of COVID vaccine, as we've already heard in testimony. And I suspect maybe Ms. Thomas or Major General Cadeau would be able to confirm this or give some context. I suspect that one of the major roles that Canadian Armed Forces is going to play in this is distributions to rural and remote communities where commercial options are not viable. And if that is the case, do we have the ability to handle the vaccine, especially the Pfizer product at minus 75 Celsius, to actually put that onto Hercs or Globemaster planes and in our trucks to get it distributed across the country, and especially to First Nations and rural and remote communities?
Thank you very much for the question, and certainly I'll refer to General Cadeau. It is anticipated that the armed forces could well, and it's not been decided yet, but could well be used for remote and rural communities, and certainly transporting into the Arctic, for example, is something that the armed forces is very acquainted with doing and expert at. Do we have the capacity right now? No. Can we procure it? Yes. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, from the idea of moving a vaccine that requires that kind of a temperature management, from the idea of it to the execution of it, including testing of airplanes, all that air safety aspect of this. What we are doing is working through all of the options. There will be no stone left unturned, no aspect of this that the planners do not look at with the Public Health Agency. And whether it is an armed forces transportation method or just armed forces contribution to the planning, it will be very thorough, and we will ensure that rural and remote communities have the same access to the vaccine as the more populous areas of Canada. General Cadeau?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Throughout the duration of the Canadian Armed Forces Department of National Defence contribution to the COVID-19 response, we have maintained forces posture prepared to respond to Canadians in their time of need across the country, including northern remote communities. So that has not changed, and it will not change as we continue to go through this crisis together as a nation. The Public Health Agency, they continue to lead the estimate of what will be required to support the vaccine rollout logistically. We're looking forward to the outtakes of that work that we're backstopping as well, to better understand the different roles that public and private partners might play in the distribution of that vaccine.
Thank you, and I have full confidence that Canadian Armed Forces can get into those remote communities. I think the bottleneck in all this is going to be the equipment, having to keep these vaccines at set temperatures, and so glad to hear, Ms. Thomas, that you're looking at procurement possibilities and getting those in place as quickly as possible. I want to switch back to the AG report, and you know, we talk about how the supply has impacted some operations, and I just want to and Ms. Thomas has said that it didn't impact our forward deployed troops in international operations. So I want to bring it back to, is it then disproportionately impacting upon training exercises, or is this lack of supply just impacting the day-to-day operation of our bases?
Thank you very much for the question, and certainly General Cadieux can speak to this, having certainly run operations domestically and overseas. We prioritize overseas operations where troops are deployed, and so when there are supply chain problems, they tend to be more affecting domestic operations and just the warehousing capabilities in bases and wings, as opposed to a ship did not go to sea because we didn't get something to it. It affects if widget X is required in 10 days and it arrived in 15 days, it doesn't mean that an operation or an exercise or a deployment or the operation of that base was affected.
Okay, so have we had any exercises actually canceled because of lack of supplies?
I'll ask General Cadieux. Not that I am aware of, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not happened.
Okay.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I think our Deputy Minister summarized it perfectly in terms of support to Canadian Armed Forces operations. We always privilege getting the material to the men and women that are deployed abroad in support of Canadians. We do that by ensuring that we have robust operational stocks. That if we require priority movement requests, that we privilege them for deployed operations. To answer your specific question, we need to move materiel to our training exercises as well, because that is where we train troops to deploy into the crucible of operations. And so generally speaking, we have tremendous success doing that. And we do not cancel exercises because of a lack of materiel. That has never been my experience. What we might have to do from time to time is find innovative solutions to continue on with our mission, which frankly is, that's part of our training to be resilient in deployed operations as well.
Thank you. I guess my final
Thank
question.
you very much. That was perfect timing, Mr. Bazan. So I will now move to Mr. Fergus for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would first of all like to thank the Auditor General, as well as all of her team members. I'd like to also thank all of the members of our armed forces. As MP for Aylmer in the Ottawa region, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the members of our armed forces who have done an exceptional job here in the National Capital Region to deal with the floods in 2017, 2018. Your presence certainly reassured a lot of people here. We certainly appreciate all of the work that you did. We appreciate your great availability at the very last minute, without any notice. You came to our aid, and we certainly appreciate that. Thanks to all of you. I'm very grateful. My colleague, Mr. Sorbara, asked a question of the Auditor General as to whether comparison had been made between our system here in Canada with the systems that exist in other countries. She answered that no, she had not carried out a comparative study with the armed forces of other G7 countries when it comes to providing materiel to bases. With regard to that, and given all of the connections and alliances that our people have with other armed forces throughout the world, I was wondering whether there were other countries whose example you would like to follow when it comes to supplying the bases and units. Is there a model that you have in mind that you would like to imitate?
I'm going to ask Troy Crosby to speak to it as he works on NATO working groups that look at supply chains and material management. I would just note that we are a unique country. We're a small armed forces, a small population, and a vast geographic area to supply. And so NATO countries are often difficult to compare ourselves to just because of our geographic expanse. And so we have a unique challenge in Canada. It's certainly not one that's insurmountable, and we're working hard at making sure that we do this better. But it is a difficult comparison for Canada just because of our geography. I'm going to ask Troy to jump in.
Thank you for the question. In fact, it's an interesting area in so much as we take part in a number of international supply chain fora with our allies on an ongoing basis, whether it's the Five Eyes partners, the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, for example. And as well, we also are very well connected with industry partners, with industry working groups, with industry conferences where best practices are explored. Being a military, not all of the commercial practices clearly apply in our circumstances, but we do share lessons and some of the initiatives that are underway. And as the Deputy Minister had mentioned, even just this week, in fact, I was speaking with my counterpart, the National Armaments Director from the United States, and supply chain resilience and supply chain issues were on the agenda. So this is an ongoing conversation. We're always all working together to do the best we can. And of course, we're maintaining our interoperability at the same time. So it's certainly an area that we're bringing into our solution and determining the best way forward.
Brièvement, Mr. Crosby.
Thank you very much for your answer. When I look at what you are trying to say, and when you compare us to the U.S. or our NATO allies, I was wondering whether there are any particular items that you would like to raise. We, the parliamentarians, are here to help you. I mentioned, for example, what you did in my region, and I forgot to mention what has been done in the long-term care centers in my riding and elsewhere. It was very impressive. Thank you very much. I was wondering whether there are any procedures in particular or any issues in particular that you would like to raise so that we would be able to move your interests forward here in government.
For the question. The lessons that we've taken away from many of these conversations with our allies are that given the unique aspects of the military supply system, there aren't any particularly specific targets that are achievable in the sense that where industry holds itself to a very high standard of responsiveness from a supply chain perspective. In our case, a lot of the success goes to our resilience and our ability to be resourceful under challenging and unpredictable circumstances. And it's that sort of resourcefulness and the thinking around continuous improvement, lessons learned, always reflecting after operations on what was achieved and how we could have done better, and sharing those lessons between our allies that's most important to us. At the same time, you're seeing some of the investments that have been approved are the outcomes of some of these conversations on how best to move forward. For example, over $200 million approved for the automatic information technology project in the summer of 2019. That sort of work and the definition work in exactly what we'll request in the request for proposal, taking into account security considerations, all come from those conversations as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crosby. We will now move to Mr. Blanchard-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank you, Ms. Thomas, for giving me some clarification a little earlier. You're talking about over 20,000 different types of products, and I can understand that if you're going to have a military supply chain, it is much more complicated than one would imagine. I've been looking at the documents that I was given in preparation for this meeting, and I came across an article from La Presse from March 2019. Apparently $700 million were saved at the department. Congratulations. But there are $2 or $3 billion less that was spent because there were delays. But there were also some items that were more expensive. Another thing that really struck me and intrigued me was really the source of the problem. I'm trying to find out where the problems stem from. It was mentioned in the article that those responsible at DND have a shortage of experts in this field. I was wondering whether you could respond to that.
You're referring to Vote 5 spending on capital projects. We, on individual projects, did save approximately $700 million that year, but we did not roll out the spending quite to the extent we intended to. Now, I think it's important to note that that spending is not lost to the department. It is in our capital envelope and it will be spent. And we are proceeding with the strong, secure, and engaged projects as have been laid out in our investment plan. Early on, as we launched strong, secure, and engaged and the range of capital investment required, we did have a shortage of procurement experts in ADM Materiel. Troy and his predecessor, Pat Finn, have worked very hard at increasing the number of procurement professionals in both the Department of National Defence and in Public Services and Procurement Canada. And so we're feeling much more comfortable with the level of employees and the competency and range of experience of our employees as we continue to proceed down the path of strong, secure, and engaged.
Merci, Madame Thomas. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous...
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I was wondering whether you could explain the problem with finding experts in this area of supply.
Much for the question. It is a question of many had been laid off when we went through a period of cuts. And so the numbers reduced. A lot of expertise retired. And so sort of that train the trainers approach to developing people was lost. And we ramped up very quickly a huge range of projects. And so we had entry-level employees, but we didn't have more mid and senior level employees to manage some of the large projects. But we are in far better situation now. We have a very robust development program for our procurement experts led by Troy's team, and we work very closely with PSBC to ensure that there is a cross-pollination of expertise between the two departments.
Merci, Madame Thomas. Effectivement, dans le même article, ça...
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. It also says that the shortage was due to a number of cuts throughout the department, especially during the 90s. So to get back to the source of the problem, do you really think that the problem of shortage of supply experts, which leads to delays and excess spending, is it simply because of the previous cuts by previous governments?
The decisions were all made within the department of making reductions in response to direction. So it were choices that were made within the Department of National Defence.
Madame Thomas, juste bien comprendre. Là,
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I'm trying to identify the source of the problem. There is a problem with the shortage of supply experts that lead to other problems. We have action plans. There are delays in receiving supplies at National Defence. I was wondering whether additional hiring of experts would be possible and whether those cuts in the past are the source of today's problem.
Thank you very much for the question. So some of those reductions were on the major project side of things in the capital envelope that Troy manages. Some of the shortages in people, yes, more people would make a difference in some cases, but this is a systemic problem, the supply chain problem within the Department of National Defense. It's not, there's no one year where you can say it all changed because we reduced the number of people. Supply chain management has modernized, and we haven't invested in it, and we are now, to ensure that we have a system that can be updated and kept evergreen going forward.
Merci, Mme Thomas. Est-ce qu'on est d'accord sur le fait que si...
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Can we agree that if there are fewer experts to think about the supply chain problems, it's because there aren't enough resources to deal with the problems or look into the current problems?
In terms of specific resources, I'll ask Troy to respond to whether he believes, he needs more people to manage this. When he does require more people, he comes to me through our formal budgeting process within the department, and more people are always needed. Troy, anything specific?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add to the answer, we've actually grown since Strong Secure Engaged was published, the number of public servants involved in our capital acquisition program, which includes the purchase of spare parts, which are delivered into the system to support our equipment as we put it into service. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Blanchard-Jocan's time is up. I will now move to Mr. Green for 6 minutes, starting now.
I got you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. You've heard me today passionately referring back to COVID distribution. There may be some difference of opinion regarding whether it's germane to this report or not. I still strongly believe it is. And so I'll spend my last time referencing specifically the issues brought up by the Auditor General's report, with the frame and the understanding that I still firmly believe that it has a direct correlation to the military's preparedness and ability for COVID vaccination distribution. So I'll refer to, through you, Madam Chair, section 3.27, where the Auditor General found that 50% of all material requested during the period covered by the audit was received after the required date of delivery. Among late deliveries, 50% were at least 15 days late, 25% were at least 40 days late. Section 3.28, among the high priority requests, they found that 60% arrived after the required delivery date, and of these, 50% were at least 6 days late, and 25% were at least 20 days late. Through you, what is the Department of National Defense's service standard for deliveries?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. Our service standard for deliveries depends on both the priority assigned to the object and the delivery methodology, whether we're doing it ourselves or contracting that delivery. I'll ask Troy and General Cadieux to both respond, because this is a very joint process between the Department and the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In certain cases where we can foresee or need to position ourselves to be able to react quickly, we actually put together spares packages of spare parts that are pre-positioned in order to allow us to respond quickly on need. Beyond that, as the Deputy Minister had mentioned, the requirement is on a case-by-case basis in most cases where the requester specifies when they need the equipment in order to support their ongoing activities.
So what are the reasons then for missing them so badly, and do the service standards need to be reconsidered?
In certain cases, per the response to the Auditor General's report, where we need to introduce additional discipline into the establishment of those high priority requests to ensure that they are in fact reflective of an urgent need and that we're not diverting resources where it could be best served somewhere else. That's part of our response. That's part of what we'll be doing in the near term, is ensuring that that clarity exists.
There's an old saying that the Army marches on its stomachs, and according to the AG report, given the need to be well provisioned with food, with material and other supplies, I'm not sure that we're able to march very far, very fast. And I think about the Argylls and the Sutherland Royal Light Hamilton Infantry housed at the John Weirfoot Armory in my riding of Hamilton Center. We want to make sure these men and women are stationed there. They get the supplies and the equipment that they need. Section 3.47 says that of the 129 high priority material requests, that the National Defense was asked to provide the supply forms that they were completed and other documents such as emails and work orders. They found that on the basis of the information they received, including explanations and supporting documentation, National Defense could not justify the high priority status of 65% of the requests that were reviewed. So do you think that high priority requests are being made for things that may not be considered high priority, so that they only arrive, say, 20 days late instead of 40 days late? Because this sounds like a way for our Canadian Forces members to try to find a workaround to the supply management system that doesn't work.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll refer to General Cadieux, but that is entirely possible, and that is why we are looking at the service standards and reviewing the documentation and the requirement and the justification for high priority items. If we divert attention from things that are truly high priority to those that are not, we take away resources from where it's most needed. And so that entire governance and oversight has to be reviewed as a part of this audit and a part of our action plan for the audit.
That answer actually suffices quite well,
Okay.
Ms. Thomas. I'll ask my last question. In the event that both the Liberals or the Conservatives try to privatize delivery services, including the COVID vaccination, is it still fair to say that it would be cheaper for the Department of National Defense to be delivering its own materials rather than using commercial services?
General Cadieux is responsible for transportation, and so I'll ask him to respond.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. We move material based on the operational necessity, and so there will be times if, for example, we need to get equipment, parts, food, additional resources to deploy troops, where we might have to rely on commercial means if that's going to be quicker than what we refer to as the national freight run or green trucks to move our equipment. So we assess the criticality of the operational requirement, the imperative to get it into the hands of the men and women that are serving on behalf of the nation as we make these determinations.
And how are you able to budget for the cost overruns for the use of commercial delivery services, and what pool of money do you have to pull from to cover your delivery overrun costs?
Madam Chair, we in all of the operations that we conduct, we plan in great detail, including the financial resources that are required, including for the use of commercial transport, if and when we need to use it to push material out to our deployed troops.
Thank you very much, General Cadieux. Members, that takes us to the end of our first round, or the third round. Before we move into the next portion of our meeting, I do have a question that was prepared by the analyst from the Library of Parliament regarding recommendation 3.57. And that recommendation states that National Defense should communicate the costs of all available transportation methods and provide clear guidance on how to select the mode of transportation to ensure that decisions are founded on a full understanding of costs. What progress has been made with respect to defining the problem and determining the best methodology to query the existing data? And I'll pose that to Ms. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. This is part of the holistic review that is being done of the entire process to look at our end-to-end delivery. And so we do need to be completely transparent on cost. We do need to make cost-effective decisions. And we do need to be able to manage the inventory and the movement of goods around the country in a way that is cost-effective. And so we will be publishing results of studies as they become available.
Thank you very much for that answer. Because we are so close to 12:45, and that's the time that we designated for committee business, I do want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. It's been a tremendous time here with you, hearing the questions of our members, the very good questions, and the answers that we've received. So I will thank you and let you know that you are free to leave this meeting at this time, and then we will go into committee business.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Great. Seeing that the witnesses have all left, we have two orders of business in front of us for the next 15 minutes. And the first is the budgets, and I believe they were all circulated to you. And I think what we will do, if it is agreeable with the committee, is to just go through each one, asking for whether or not it is the will of the committee to adopt the budgets as presented. And then we do have a service contract, which the clerk has sent to all members. Are there any questions before we begin? Mr. Longfield? Oh, you are muted, Mr. Longfield.
I knew that. Sorry. I was just saying thank you very much to the clerk. The estimates are a lot lower than they normally come in at when you don't have travel. And I wonder whether we're able to approve them in one shot rather than do each one individually.
I will let the clerk answer that for us. Absolutely, we could take care of this in one motion, or if it is a unanimous, to just adopt the budgets as presented.
In that case, I would so move that we adopt all the estimates.
Are there any questions around that? Mr. Blanchet-Joncan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a simple question. I noticed that there are a lot of colleagues joining us virtually. And if you look at all of these budgets, it says for there are a lot of things here for working meals, but there are a lot of people who aren't going to be here in person. I was wondering if we wanted to save some money, we could take that off. Many of the colleagues join us just virtually. Certainly we could prepare meals, but if nobody is here to eat them, then it seems to me that that's a waste of money.
Speak to that issue, because I know that there is a process for determining what is needed to be ordered.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. I've included meals in the budget, one for each meeting that we normally would have on the study. We don't necessarily spend that money or have to spend it, and if we don't, it goes directly back into the budget for committees. It's a question of being able to order meals if members indicate that they're going to be present. And even if we had half the members here, it probably wouldn't cost the full amount, but it's a question of having the money available so that we don't have to go back and ask for more in a budget. The same with the headsets. The number may be a little bit higher than what we may actually spend. We may not have the actual number of headsets for witnesses, but it's a question of being prepared so that we don't have to come back to you and say we need a budget for $75 to pay for something. And as I said, the money goes back into the committee budget, the general committee budget of the directorate if it's not spent. And that's usually fairly quickly after the end of a study.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Joncan?
Ça répond à mes questions. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you. That does answer my question, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Clerk.
Are we ready for the question? All in favor to adopt the budgets as presented? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the calendar. After the last meeting and pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee, the clerk, analysts, and myself had a discussion, and I would like to propose the following changes to the calendar. I do believe that it was circulated to you ahead of time. I hope you've had the opportunity to take a look at it. The first change would be that the committee invite the appropriate witnesses to appear on Thursday, December 3rd, in relation to Report 3, Taxation of E-Commerce of the 2019 Spring Reports of the Auditor General of Canada. And that directly relates to a motion that was adopted at the last meeting. And number 2, that the committee study any available draft reports on Tuesday, December 8th. Is it the will of the committee to adopt the amended calendar as presented? All right, seeing that everyone has agreed to that, we will adopt this calendar. And that takes care of our business, I believe, for this period during our meeting. If there are no other questions or comments by members, I would just remind you that our next meeting will be on Tuesday, November 24th, with Mr. Longfield chairing it. So I think you're in for a treat with Mr. Longfield chairing. And if everyone is in agreement, we will adjourn the meeting.
Madam Chair, I just have one question.
Oh, yes, Ms. Yip.
Is there any update on the training?
Oh, yes. So that is on the calendar, I believe. And it is scheduled for Thursday, the 26th. And I believe it was scheduled on that day, so that didn't change from the original calendar.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. No other questions? Then I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much.